Hello, friends, and hello to Pan Macmillan. And thanks to Pan Macmillan for asking me to speak to you about Palace of Illusions. And thanks very much to all of you who have read the book or have recommended it to people. I really appreciate that. Thank you also for all your questions that you have sent, that Pan Macmillan has sent on to me. So I'm going to get started answering these questions. So, one of the questions is, what gave me the idea of writing Draupadi's story and making her the heroine of the Palace of Illusions? Well, ever since I was little and my grandfather told me the story of the Mahabharata, I started thinking about the amazing women in that epic. And of course, Draupadi was the most important of them all, the most fascinating, the strongest. So I always wondered, what is she really thinking? How is she feeling as she goes through these amazing things that are happening to her? And I wanted to write a novel where she is right at the center. She is the heroine, and we get all her thoughts and her understanding of the events. So that's why I wanted to make her the heroine. Now, putting women at the centers of my books has always been important to me. More recently, I have written the Forest of Enchantments, which is Sita's story, again putting Sita at the center, bringing out, I hope, her complexities. Great question. How do I pick my sources? For my epics, I do a lot of research. It takes me several years, therefore, to write books that are based on the epics. For the Mahabharata, of course, I went to Vyas. I read Vyas in his English translations. I also read the Kashiram Das's Bengali Mahabharata and a number of other Mahabharats by Kamala Subramaniam, by Raja Gopalachari. So I wanted to make sure that I really got a lot of different sources and different details from the various Mahabharats. I did the same thing with the Ramayana. I read Valmiki, I read the Bengali Ramayana as well. And then I also read the Adbhut Ramayana, the Kamba Ramayana, and I wanted to again make sure that my sources were really accurate, because I don't want people to say, oh, Divakruni has just made up these characters. No, they are really, these women characters are strong and complex, and they can continue to inspire us. So, great question. I also read other novels or stories or even poems. So there are poems by Tagore on all of these characters that I read and learned a lot from. All right. How did I decide on the title, The Palace of Illusions? Well, first of all, in the story itself, uh, Draupadi is very fascinated. She's always wanted a home of her own, and maybe many of us can relate to that, the desire of a place that reflects your personality, where you are in charge. She's always wanted that. She's never had that. But when the Pandavas they're given one part of the kingdom, a really terrible part with just forests and nothing else. But they managed to have this beautiful palace built for them, this magical palace. And that's the one I call Mayapuri. I call it the Palace of Illusions. And I have shown that Draupadi has designed this palace and she loves it. But as the story goes on, so Palace of Illusions is also a, a book about the human being's movement through the world, the soul's journey. And as Draupadi undertakes the soul's journey, Krishna, who is her great and wonderful guide, tells her that the Palace of Illusions also refers to this world in which we find ourselves, that it is all an illusion. The real person that we are, the real self that we are, the Atman, is different from what we think we are as we go through this Palace of Illusions. So that's also a reason. Let me see. Here's another great question. I remember vividly how you depicted the scene where Draupadi was being dragged into the Sabha by Dushasan. How could you imagine something like that? Now, that's a great question, and it's really a mystery. Like, how am I able to write? I, I always give thanks to God because really, otherwise, I couldn't write without divine inspiration, without help from God. I couldn't write a single word. So He puts things into my imagination. I begin to visualize. I'm a very visual writer, so I begin to visualize things. Then I try to get into a character's head. So I'm in Draupadi's head trying to feel what she's feeling. And I remember when I was writing that scene, and also in the Forest of Enchantments, when I'm writing the final scene where Sita is being asked by Ram to do Agni Pariksha. I was crying in all of these scenes because I'm really feeling what the characters are feeling. So I think that's how I write things. I have to feel them, I have to imagine them. Often I'm very visual, so I have to visualize them. Here's another question. Have you ever thought of writing a book about Krishna? Well, Palace of Illusions is very much a book about Krishna as well. I think he is he's not the narrator, but he is as important as Panchali. And he is the one who's there in her life from the beginning to the end, and she realizes that he is the most important person, the divine being. He's the most important in her life, and I hope the reader will realize in our lives also. Do I have a real life inspiration? That's a great question for my strong women leads. I think I have to say uh, my real life inspiration is my mother. She has passed away now, but she went through a lot of difficulties in her life. She lived in a time and came from a traditional family where women were not allowed to do a lot of things that she would have liked to do. She was a very intelligent and talented person, but she didn't even get to complete her college degree just because of her situation. But she lived her life with great courage, great dignity. She stood up against wrong. She brought up all of us children pretty much on her own. So I would say she's a great real life inspiration who has made me want to write about strong women in all of my books. All right, let's see the next question. Here's a great one. Never expect a man to avenge you. So that is a quotation from Palace of Illusions. And it says, Draupadi had to wait for years for the Pandavas to avenge her insults. Why do women always have to be understanding? That's a great question. To be honest and to be frank, women are not always understanding. But yes, our culture tells us we have to be understanding. We have to, meekly and mildly take what uh, life gives to us or society gives us, even if it's negative, even if it's not something that's just or fair. But I think the strong women of our epics show us that it is very possible, and in fact, it is important, necessary sometimes, to stand up against society and say what we need to say. So, for instance, when Draupadi is in the Sabha, she stands up and she says, this is a wrong thing that is being done to me. And she talks to Bhishma and Drona and the great elders, and she says, how can you allow this injustice, this shaming of me to happen in this court? So certainly Draupadi will speak out. Kunti, she speaks up. When Kunti is another great strong character in the Palace of Illusions. So she's another one who'll speak out, and he will say to Dhritarashtra, you have to bring up these children, my children, they are really the children of the king, Pandu, and you have to bring them up, you have to give them what they need. Okay, one final question. And there are great questions, but I'll have to end here because this video is becoming very long. But I hope to answer more questions for you on my Twitter page, on my Facebook page, on my Instagram. So please do be in touch with me. I will end with one last question, which is, what mystery in your own life could be a plot for a book? And I have to confess, I really don't have any mysteries in my life. I live a very quiet life. When my children were little, they used to say, Mom, you have a very boring life, because I teach at the university, I write my books, I do some community work, I do some scriptural study. I like studying the scriptures, studying the Bhagavad Gita, for instance. I like to meditate, I like to garden, but these are all very quiet things, and there's really no mystery. And maybe the only mystery is, where do those story ideas come from? So, thank you, friends. Wonderful questions. And I hope to see you at some point. And good luck through the quarantine. Wishing you all the best. Be safe and read lots of books. Thank you.